I found a live stream of my apartment on the dark web. I don't know who's watching. So this all started about 2 weeks ago. And trust me, I didn't plan on falling into this rabbit hole. I was bored, scrolling through Reddit late at night, and I stumbled across a thread about the dark web. You know the kind, people sharing weird stories about what they've seen or experienced while digging too deep. Half the time, I think those stories are total BS. But after reading a few posts, I got curious. It's easy to brush stuff off as fiction when you're sitting comfortably behind a screen. That night, though, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I downloaded Tor. I wasn't looking for anything illegal. Honestly, I just wanted to see if all the hype was real. I figured I'd find some sketchy forums or shady websites selling fake passports and drugs. I didn't expect to find what I did. After about an hour of browsing, clicking through links that led to more dead ends than anything interesting, I found a site with no name. Just a black background and a tiny green dot in the middle of the screen. It didn't seem like much, but curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked it. A window popped up with a single line of text. Watch closely. Before I could even think about closing it, a video player appeared, and what loaded on screen nearly made me drop my laptop. It was a live feed of my living room. Now I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. I know exactly what every inch of my place looks like, and there was no mistaking it. The grainy black and white footage was my living room. Same cheap furniture, same framed poster of Pulp Fiction on the wall, same pile of laundry I'd been too lazy to fold. The camera was pointed from the far corner, like it had a perfect view of everything. I froze, my heart doing that weird thing where it skips a beat and then starts pounding so hard you feel it in your throat. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The footage was live. I could see the second hand on the wall clock ticking away. I could hear the faint hum of my fridge in the background. It was happening in real time. I slammed my laptop shut, breathing hard, my mind racing a mile a minute. How could someone be live streaming my apartment? I checked every corner, every crevice, but there was no camera in sight. I even ripped apart the cushions on my couch, flipped over furniture, but there was nothing. No hidden camera, no suspicious wires. It didn't make sense. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I found a video of my apartment on the dark web and had no idea where it was coming from. They'd probably think I was nuts. Or worse, they wouldn't do anything. It's not like I had proof. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep much that night. Every noise, every creak of the building settling felt amplified in the dark. I kept glancing around, half expecting to find a shadowy figure watching me from the corners of my apartment, but there was nothing. Just the eerie quiet of the night. When I finally did fall asleep, it was fitful. I dreamed about the camera, about faceless people watching me through their screens, taking notes, waiting for me to make the wrong move. The next morning, I told myself it was probably some elaborate prank. Maybe a neighbor set up a camera or a hacker had accessed one of my old devices. I wasn't tech savvy enough to figure it out on my own, but I thought about hiring someone to check my apartment for bugs. That idea, at least, calmed me down a little. But then, something happened that made the situation much worse. I logged back into my laptop later that day, against my better judgment. Part of me thought the video stream might have been a one-time glitch or some freak coincidence, but I was wrong. The second I opened Tor, the same nameless site loaded up, without me even clicking anything. The same live feed of my living room filled the screen. Except this time, there was something different. Something that made my stomach churn. There was a note on the coffee table. It wasn't there when I left for work. I was sure of that. I would have noticed it. My place was cluttered, but I kept the coffee table clean, mostly out of habit. But now, on the screen, there was a piece of paper sitting dead center, plain as day. From the angle of the camera, I couldn't read what it said, but the fact that it was there at all that someone had entered my apartment without me knowing, made my blood run cold. I slammed my laptop shut again, my hands shaking. I didn't even have to think about it this time. I was out the door in a flash, racing back to my apartment. When I got there, everything looked normal. The door was locked, nothing seemed out of place. But when I stepped inside, I saw it. The note. It was sitting right where it had been in the video, on the coffee table, perfectly centered. I stared at it for what felt like hours before I finally worked up the nerve to walk over and pick it up. In neat, black ink, the note read, "You're being watched. Don't look for the camera." That's when I knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't some prank. This wasn't a hacker messing with me from a distance. Whoever had written this note had been in my apartment. They had access to me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. And worst of all, they were still watching. I stood there staring at that note, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. It was impossible. There was no way someone had gotten into my apartment. I was careful. I locked the door every time I left, double-checked the windows, but the note was real, and it was sitting right in front of me. I crumpled it in my fist, my heart racing. I knew I had to get out of there, but I felt paralyzed. It wasn't just fear, it was the feeling of being watched, like 1,000 invisible eyes were tracking my every move, waiting to see what I'd do next. I don't know why, but I opened my laptop again. Maybe I thought there'd be something else on that feed, something to explain how this was happening. The site loaded instantly, like it was expecting me, and sure enough, the same live feed of my living room appeared on the screen. Only this time, the camera had moved. The angle was different, higher, like it was now looking down at the room from above, almost like a bird's eye view. But there was no way a camera could be in my ceiling. I glanced up, half expecting to see some lens staring back at me. But there was nothing. Just the old cracked paint of my apartment's ceiling, unchanged. And then I saw something that made my skin crawl. On the screen, there was a figure, barely visible in the shadowed corner of the room. It wasn't moving, just standing there, almost blending into the darkness. My brain refused to process it at first, like it didn't make sense. But then I realized what it was. Someone was in my apartment. I shot up from the couch, my pulse spiking. I turned to look at the corner of the room where the figure had been in the feed, but there was no one there. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a half-empty bottle of wine, and held it up like a weapon. I checked every room, every closet, behind every door, but the apartment was empty. No intruder, no sign of forced entry, but the camera feed, it had shown someone. I ran back to my laptop, but now the figure was gone. The feed looked the same as before, like a normal, boring shot of my living room. No shadows, no movement. Just my messy apartment, as if nothing strange had happened at all. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if I was losing it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the stress of seeing my place on some creepy live stream was making me see things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew better. That figure hadn't been a trick of the light. Someone had been in my apartment. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my phone, threw some clothes in a bag, and left. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to be somewhere else, anywhere that wasn't that apartment. I ended up crashing at a friend's place for the night, but I didn't tell them what was happening. How could I? How do you explain that someone's watching your every move and sneaking into your apartment to leave creepy notes? The next morning, I woke up with the same sinking feeling in my gut. My friend was already out for work, and I was alone again. I pulled out my phone, trying to convince myself to check the live stream one more time. Maybe, just maybe, it was all a mistake. Maybe the site would be gone and this nightmare would be over. But when I opened the browser, the site loaded up instantly, like before. Except now, the camera was in my bedroom. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The feed was crystal clear, showing my unmade bed, the nightstand, even the clothes I had left on the floor in my rush to leave. The camera angle was different again. This time, it was looking down at my bed from what seemed like an impossible height, like it was mounted on the ceiling or hovering just below it. But that wasn't the worst part. On the bed, there was another note. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized what it meant. I hadn't been home since yesterday. The note wasn't there when I left. Whoever was watching me had been inside my apartment again, and they knew I would check the stream. They wanted me to see it. I didn't even think. I grabbed my bag and headed straight back to the apartment. I had to see what was on that note, even though every rational part of my brain was screaming at me not to. It was like I was being pulled back, drawn into some sick game I didn't understand. When I got to the apartment, everything looked normal. The door was still locked, no sign of forced entry, but that didn't make me feel any better. I unlocked the door, my heart pounding in my chest, and stepped inside. The note was there, sitting on my bed, just like in the stream. This one was different from the last. The handwriting was the same, neat, precise, but the message was even more unnerving. You shouldn't have left. Now it's your turn to watch. I stared at the note, my hands trembling. What did that mean? My turn to watch? Watch what? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I grabbed the note, crumpling it in my fist like the first one, but that didn't make it any less real. Then I remembered the feed. I rushed back to my laptop, heart hammering. I opened it, the screen lighting up with the now familiar sight. The camera was still showing my bedroom, the same angle from above. I scanned the room on the screen, looking for something, anything that would explain what was happening. And then, the screen flickered. The camera switched to a new location, a place I hadn't seen before. It looked like a hallway, dimly lit and narrow. At first I couldn't tell where it was. Then, slowly, the camera started moving, like someone was walking, holding it steady as they moved through the space. I watched in horror as the camera rounded a corner, and suddenly I recognized the hallway. It was the hallway outside my apartment. The camera kept moving, getting closer and closer to my door. My breath hitched. This wasn't a recording. This was live. Someone was coming to my apartment right now, and they wanted me to watch. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. But before I could hit call, there was a knock at the door. It was gentle, almost polite, but in the dead silence of my apartment, it might as well have been a gunshot. They were here, and I had no idea what they wanted. The knock echoed through my apartment like thunder, even though it was soft. It was almost polite, like whoever or whatever was outside didn't want to scare me. But the thing is, that gentle knock made it even worse. It felt calculated, like they knew I was watching them get closer, knew I was already terrified, and this was their way of savoring it. I stood there frozen, phone in hand, still staring at the door. My thumb hovered over the call button for 911, but I hesitated. What if they were listening? What if they knew exactly what I was going to do? The same way they knew I'd be watching that live feed. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the buzzing of my old fridge and the pounding of my heart. Another knock, this time a little louder, more insistent. I flinched, taking a step back toward the kitchen. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor. I had to know who was outside. With shaking hands, I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. There was no one there. I blinked, staring down the corridor. It was the same dingy hallway I'd walked down 1,000 times since moving into this place. Scuffed floors, flickering lights, and the faint smell of someone's burned dinner drifting through the air. But there was no sign of the person who had knocked. I backed away, my heart pounding harder than ever. I didn't understand. I had seen them walking toward my apartment on the live feed just moments ago. Had they slipped into one of the other units? Were they hiding? Suddenly my phone buzzed in my hand, nearly making me drop it. I glanced down at the screen, and my blood ran cold. It was a notification from the same nameless site. I hadn't even reopened the laptop, but it was sending me messages now. My hands shook as I unlocked the phone and opened the notification. The message was short, just 5 words. Open the door. We're waiting. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Every instinct told me not to open the door. Whatever was out there, whatever had been following me through the camera, was playing a twisted game, and I was the target. I knew better than to give them what they wanted, but something else nagged at me. If I didn't open the door, how long would this go on? How far would they push this game? The camera had already been in my home. They had already left notes, invaded my space. What would they do next? I had to face it. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the deadbolt. The soft click felt impossibly loud in the quiet of my apartment. I stood there for a second, my breath catching in my throat, and slowly turned the knob. The door creaked open, and I stepped back, bracing myself for what I might see. But there was no one there. The hallway was still empty, just as I had seen through the peephole. My apartment door swung open, the hinges groaning as it moved. I stared down the corridor, expecting something, anything to jump out at me. But nothing happened. No footsteps, no shadows, no sounds. Just the unsettling quiet of the building around me. I was about to close the door when I saw it. Another note. It was lying on the ground, just outside the threshold of my apartment, perfectly folded and placed in the middle of the hallway. My heart sank. They'd been here all right, but they didn't need to knock. They were already inside my head. I bent down and picked it up, my fingers trembling as I unfolded the paper. The note was shorter than the others, but it hit me harder than anything I'd seen so far. You're not alone in there. My heart stopped. I spun around, my eyes darting around the apartment, scanning every corner, every shadow, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. The apartment was silent, but that didn't mean anything. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone slipped in when I opened the door? Had they been inside the whole time, watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment? I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, another wine bottle, half finished, and held it in front of me, like it would somehow protect me from whatever was lurking inside my home. My breath came in shallow gasps as I moved slowly from room to room, checking behind doors, inside closets, under the bed. Nothing. No one. But the note? It wasn't a mistake. Whoever had written it knew something I didn't. I went back to the living room, my legs shaking with every step. I sat down, gripping the wine bottle tight, and opened my laptop again. The live stream was still running, still showing my apartment from the same impossible angle, like the camera was floating just below the ceiling. And then I saw it. In the background of the feed, near the edge of the frame, there was movement. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but as I stared, I realized what it was. The camera was showing a figure in the far corner of my bedroom. They were almost completely hidden in the darkness, standing perfectly still. I didn't need to check the room. I knew what I'd find. Someone was in my apartment, and they were waiting for me to see them. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was like they were waiting for me to come closer, waiting for me to acknowledge them. My hand hovered over the laptop, ready to slam it shut, but something stopped me. The screen flickered again, and the camera feed zoomed in, focusing on the shadowy figure, and then they spoke. It wasn't through the laptop. It wasn't a distorted, creepy voice like you'd expect in some horror movie. It was clear, close, like someone was standing right behind me, whispering in my ear, "I told you, you're not alone." I whipped around, ready to face whoever, or whatever, was in my apartment. But the room was empty. I was alone, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. But the voice hadn't been in my head. It was real. It had come from inside the room, and now I knew for certain. The game was just getting started. I couldn't breathe. The voice had been so close, too close. It wasn't my imagination. I had heard it, felt the whisper on the back of my neck. My body was frozen, my mind racing, but my surroundings, the quiet apartment, the still air, remained unchanged. It was like the whole world had shifted, but I was the only one who noticed. Slowly, I stood up from the couch, my legs weak, the wine bottle still clutched in my hand. I didn't dare check the feed again. I couldn't. Seeing that figure in the corner, hearing the voice, it was too much. But I needed to know. I needed to prove to myself that I was still in control, that my apartment wasn't under the thumb of some unseen force. I took a deep breath and started moving, inching toward the hallway that led to my bedroom. My footsteps were impossibly loud in the silence, each creak of the floorboard sending waves of dread through my body. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something darting out of the corners of my vision, but there was nothing. When I reached the entrance to my bedroom, I stopped. The door was open, but just slightly, barely enough for me to see inside. I could make out the edge of my bed, the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains, but that was all. My pulse quickened as I stared at the darkness beyond the door, half expecting the shadowy figure from the feed to suddenly step out and make itself known. But it didn't. I gripped the door handle and pushed it open with a shaky hand, the hinges creaking as the door swung wider. The room was empty, just like the rest of the apartment. No one was hiding in the shadows, no figure lurking in the corner. Everything was exactly how I'd left it. My unmade bed, the pile of clothes by the dresser, the faint scent of the candle I'd burned last night. Except for one thing. There was a new note. It was sitting on my bed, right in the middle, neatly folded. My heart dropped. I hadn't seen it before, not on the live feed, not when I was searching the apartment earlier. But it was here now, mocking me. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to know what it said, but I knew I had no choice. This was all part of their twisted game, and they were pulling the strings. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the note. This one was different. It wasn't a taunt or a threat like the others. It was a question. Where will you go when we come for you? I stumbled back, dropping the note like it had burned me. My mind raced, trying to process the message. When we come for you, they weren't just watching anymore. They were planning something. They were coming. And I had no idea when or how. Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't sit and wait for them to make their next move. But where could I go? I felt trapped, like a rat in a maze with no exit. My apartment had become a prison, and every corner felt like it was hiding some unseen threat. I needed to get out, to put distance between me and this nightmare. I grabbed my bag, stuffing in whatever clothes I could find, my hands moving so fast I could barely keep them steady. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to leave. I wasn't safe here. But then, as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed again. I nearly dropped it, the vibration rattling through my bones. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what the next message from that cursed site would say. But I couldn't help it. My fingers moved on their own as I opened the notification. The message was short, simple, just 2 words. Don't run. My breath caught in my throat. How could they know? How could they possibly know what I was doing? Were they watching me right now? From where? How were they seeing me? My mind flashed back to the live stream, to the impossible angles of the cameras, to the shifting perspectives that followed my every move. Were there more cameras hidden throughout my apartment? Were they watching me from the ceiling, the walls, the air vents? I couldn't see them, but they were there. They had to be. I needed to leave. I couldn't listen to them anymore. They wanted me to stay, to play their game, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I bolted for the front door, not even bothering to close it behind me as I raced down the hallway. The dim, flickering lights of the apartment building cast long, eerie shadows on the walls, and every step I took felt like it was being echoed by someone or something following me. When I reached the stairwell, I didn't stop. I ran down flight after flight, the sound of my footsteps bouncing off the walls. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that apartment as possible. Finally, I burst out of the building and into the cold night air. I stood there for a moment, panting, trying to catch my breath. The street was eerily quiet. The only sound, the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, watching me, but the street was empty. For a second, I thought I was safe. I thought maybe I'd outrun whatever was happening, put enough distance between me and the nightmare that I could finally breathe again. But then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The message was waiting for me, sitting at the top of the screen like a silent taunt. You can't run from us. And then, below that, a second message appeared, almost instantly. Turn around. My heart stopped. My hands shook. I didn't want to. I couldn't, but I did. And there, standing just a few feet away, barely illuminated by the faint glow of a street light, was the figure from the live feed. I couldn't see their face, couldn't make out any details, but they were there, standing perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't move. The figure standing under the streetlight was just a silhouette, dark and faceless. But I knew, they were the one behind it all. The one who had been watching me, stalking me, pulling me deeper into this twisted nightmare. My mind screamed at me to run, to get as far away from that thing as I could, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was like my body had shut down, frozen in place by the pure terror that washed over me. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, each inhale shaky and shallow. Then, the figure took a step toward me. I felt my pulse spike, adrenaline kicking in as my body finally broke free from the paralysis. I took a step back, my eyes locked on the figure, trying to gauge how fast they were moving. But they weren't rushing. They weren't running at me like you'd expect in some horror movie. No, they were walking. Slow, deliberate. Like they knew exactly how much time they had. Like they were savoring every second. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I turned and ran. My shoes pounded against the pavement, the cold air biting at my face as I sprinted down the empty street. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on putting as much distance between me and that figure as possible. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were right behind me, just out of sight, closing the gap with every step. I reached the corner of the street and made a sharp turn, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to keep moving, keep running, keep myself out of their reach. And then, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what it said. But my hand moved to my pocket before I could stop it, pulling out the phone with trembling fingers. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold as the message appeared. "We're everywhere." I stumbled, nearly tripping over my own feet. My mind raced. Everywhere? What did that mean? Were there more of them? Was this thing not just one person, but a whole group, watching me, chasing me? I looked around, desperate for a place to hide, but the street was empty. I didn't know where to go, who to turn to. It felt like the entire world had shrunk, like no matter where I went, they would find me. I ducked into an alley, hoping the shadows would hide me, and pressed myself against the cold brick wall, trying to calm my breathing. The alley was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering street lamp at the far end. I checked my phone again, half expecting another message to appear. But this time, the phone stayed silent. I stood there, waiting, listening for any sound of footsteps, any sign that they were still following me. But all I heard was the distant hum of the city, the occasional car passing by on the street beyond the alley. For a moment, I thought maybe I had lost them. Maybe I had outrun whatever was chasing me. And then, from the darkness, a voice whispered, "You can't hide forever?" It was the same voice, the same one I had heard in my apartment. Soft, calm, and terrifyingly close. I whipped around, my heart nearly stopping as I scanned the shadows, but there was no one there. Just the dark alley, stretching out before me like an endless tunnel. Then the voice came again, this time from behind me. "We're closer than you think." I spun back, panic surging through me, but once again, nothing. Just empty air. My phone buzzed in my hand and I nearly dropped it. I looked down, dread settling in the pit of my stomach. Another message. "Look up." Every muscle in my body tensed. Slowly, I raised my head, my eyes following the line of the building to the roof above. And there they were. The figure was standing on the edge of the roof, directly above me, looking down like they had been there the whole time, watching me struggle, watching me panic. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing could explain what was happening. They were everywhere. They were the shadows, the cameras, the eyes watching from the corners of the room, from the ceiling, from the walls. I took a step back, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I turned and sprinted out of the alley, not caring where I was going, just desperate to get away from that thing. But the messages kept coming. "You can't escape us. We've always been here. This is only the beginning." I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the sidewalk, gasping for air. My phone slipped from my hand, the screen glowing in the darkness, taunting me with more messages, more threats. I didn't need to look at the phone to know what it said next. "It's time to stop running." I looked up, and there they were again, standing just a few feet away, silhouetted by the streetlight, their face still hidden in shadow. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew there was no point in running anymore. They had me. I don't know how long I sat there staring at them, waiting for the inevitable. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't seem to exist in that moment. All I knew was that it was over. They had won. And then, without a word, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as if they had never been there. I sat there trembling, my mind blank, unable to process what had just happened. The messages stopped after that. The feed went offline. But the feeling of being watched, never left. Even now, as I sit in my new apartment, far away from that place, I can still feel it. The eyes, always watching, always waiting. Because no matter how far I run, no matter how well I hide, I know one thing for sure. They're still out there, and they're coming back. I signed up for a work-from-home gig on the dark web. Now my house feels like a prison. I wasn't really looking for anything dark or illegal. I know. That's how these things always start. But trust me, I'm not that kind of person. I've got a decent job, a modest place, and a pretty normal life. Sure, money was tight, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. Still, when I stumbled across that listing one late night, I thought, why not? I'd been browsing through random job forums, looking for something I could do from home, maybe pick up some side cash. You know those under-the-radar gigs people sometimes talk about? Testing websites, filling out surveys, whatever. I wasn't having much luck, though, and after a while, I found myself in that weird corner of the internet, the part where things start to feel a little off. There it was, in a sketchy forum I had never heard of before. Work from home, make easy money, no experience needed. The link had that familiar scammy look, like something you'd normally scroll past without a second thought. But it wasn't the ad that caught my attention. It was the comments beneath it. People were actually raving about it. Real people, not bots, not shills. Dozens of comments like, "This changed my life," And I was skeptical too, but trust me, it's legit. Now I'm not dumb. I knew there had to be a catch. But I'll admit, curiosity got the best of me. So I clicked. The link took me to this blacked out web page, minimalist as hell. Just a single line of text and a button. Apply for the job. Earn easy money from home. Beneath that, a long disclaimer about anonymity, confidentiality, the usual legal jargon that made zero sense. It felt shady, but again, the comments had me thinking maybe, just maybe, this was one of those under-the-table gigs where the pay was great because no one knew about it. I filled out the form, basic stuff, name, email, what kind of work-from-home experience I had, which was none, honestly, and then it asked for my home address. That part gave me pause. But then again, they probably needed it to send whatever equipment or materials I'd be working with, right? I hesitated for a minute before typing it in. The moment I clicked submit, I got an email. No company logo, no real info, just a subject line. Welcome to the team. Next steps. Inside, there was a single line. You will receive a package within 48 hours. Do not leave your house after it arrives. That was it. At that point, I knew something was off. But the excitement of actually getting a response from something so quickly and the lure of easy money had me hooked. The warning about staying inside? It felt dramatic, sure, but maybe it was part of some non-disclosure agreement thing. Maybe they didn't want me talking about the work with anyone. I brushed it off. 2 days later, the package arrived. It wasn't a typical Amazon box or anything like that. It looked homemade, wrapped in plain brown paper with my name scrawled on the top in sharp, uneven letters. No return address, no branding. The delivery guy didn't say a word when he handed it over, just gave me a weird look and walked off. Inside was an old, bulky laptop, not one of those sleek, modern ones. This thing looked like it was from the early 2000s, clunky, heavy, and covered in scratches. There was a piece of paper taped to the top that said, "Instructions enclosed. Follow carefully." I figured this was the equipment I'd be using, so I plugged it in and booted it up. The screen flickered for a moment before a black window appeared, just like the website, minimalist, with a single line of text. Welcome. Do not attempt to turn off this device. Do not leave your home. Await further instructions. I don't know why, but something about that line made my stomach drop. It wasn't just the directness, it was the tone. It didn't feel like a suggestion, it felt like a command. I should have stopped right there. I should have shut the laptop, called someone, done something. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was just part of the job. That maybe this was all some kind of weird startup or secret gig where they tested your loyalty by making things sound ominous. It didn't help that the comments I'd read kept playing in my mind. Changed my life. Trust me, it's legit. So I waited. Hours passed and nothing happened. The screen stayed black. No further instructions came. I started to think maybe it was just a glitch or maybe I'd been scammed after all. But then, just after midnight, the laptop made this low buzzing noise. A new message appeared on the screen. Task 1, watch the video. Do not close the laptop. I stared at the words for a long moment, the sense of dread creeping in. A video link appeared, and before I could even think about it, the screen autoplayed a grainy black and white video. It was short, maybe 30 seconds long, and it showed nothing but a street. Some generic, dimly lit street at night, completely deserted. That's when I noticed something. The street in the video, it looked familiar, too familiar. It was my street. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It wasn't just that the street looked familiar, it was my street. The same cracked sidewalk, the same street light that flickered in front of my neighbor's house. And then I saw it, my car, parked right there, in its usual spot. My chest tightened. This wasn't some random video. Whoever had sent me this was filming outside my house. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the grainy footage, my heart thudding in my chest. The video didn't show anything else, just the street, quiet and empty. I felt like I should close the laptop, but I couldn't move. I just kept watching, waiting for something to happen. The seconds ticked by, and then, just as the video was about to end, I saw it. Movement. Someone walked into the frame, barely visible in the low light. At first I thought it was just some random person, maybe a jogger or someone walking their dog. But then the figure stopped, right in front of my house. They stood there, facing the camera, staring straight ahead. I couldn't make out their face. It was hidden by shadows, but they were standing too still, too deliberately. I froze. Was this someone playing a prank? Maybe a neighbor messing with me? Then, as if on cue, the figure turned slowly, almost mechanically, and started walking up my driveway. The screen went black. My heart felt like it was going to pound out of my chest. I slammed the laptop shut and jumped up from the chair, stumbling back a few steps as if the thing had burned me. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My house, my street, and something, walking up to my door. I glanced toward the front of my house, half expecting to see a silhouette standing in the window. But everything looked normal, dark, quiet, just like it always was this late at night. I listened carefully, straining to hear any sound, footsteps, a knock on the door, anything. But there was only silence. I told myself it had to be a joke. That's all it was, right? Someone messing with me, using some kind of pre-recorded video. Maybe the footage wasn't even live. That had to be it. I mean, why else would someone go through all this trouble? But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I tried to shake off the feeling creeping up my spine, but it wouldn't go away. The instructions had said not to leave the house, and now I understood why. The moment I stepped outside, there was a chance that figure, the one I had just seen, would be waiting for me. I decided to double-check the locks, pacing around the house, trying to calm myself down. Everything was locked up tight, just like it had been. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Right there, from the shadows just beyond the windows. I went back to the laptop, debating whether or not to open it again. Part of me wanted to throw it out the window, but the other part, the part that had signed up for this in the first place, wanted to see what happened next. Maybe if I finished the tasks, I could get some closure. Maybe this would all make sense by the end. With shaky hands, I opened the laptop again. The screen flickered to life, and a new message popped up. Task 2. Turn off all the lights. Do not look outside. My stomach twisted. This was getting worse, but I felt trapped. Every instinct told me to stop, to shut down the laptop and forget I'd ever heard of this job. But I couldn't. It was like I had stepped into some twisted game, and the only way out was to keep playing. I took a deep breath and started turning off the lights, one by one. The house fell into complete darkness. I couldn't see anything except for the faint glow of the laptop screen. The silence grew heavier, like the walls were closing in around me. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, my back pressed against the wall, trying to follow the instructions. Do not look outside. The temptation was almost unbearable. Every fiber of my being wanted to glance toward the window, just to check, just to make sure no one was standing there. But I resisted. The laptop buzzed and another message appeared. You're doing well. Task 3. Wait. Wait? That was it? What was I waiting for? I stared at the screen, the tension rising inside me. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my ears ringing with the suffocating silence of my darkened house. I didn't know how long I was supposed to wait, and with each passing minute, the pressure built. I wasn't even sure what I was waiting for. A sound? Another task? Someone to knock on the door? Then, without warning, my phone buzzed on the table next to me. It was so sudden, so loud in the darkness that I jumped, knocking over the chair behind me. I scrambled to pick up my phone, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. There was a text message, but not from any number I recognized. "Don't open the door." I stared at the words, my heart hammering in my chest. Don't open the door? What door? I hadn't even heard anyone knock, but the moment I read that message, there it was. Tap, tap, tap. A soft knock, coming from the front door. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, my phone clutched in my hand, my eyes locked on the front door across the room. Another knock, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wanted me to know they were there. My breath caught in my throat as I took a shaky step backward, my mind racing. The video, the figure walking up to my door, the warning. Then the knocking stopped, replaced by something worse. From the other side of the door, I heard a slow, deliberate whisper, barely audible through the wood. "I know you're in there." I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It wasn't just that the street looked familiar. It was my street. The same cracked sidewalk, the same streetlight that flickered in front of my neighbor's house. And then I saw it, my car, parked right there, in its usual spot. My chest tightened. This wasn't some random video. Whoever had sent me this was filming outside my house. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the grainy footage, my heart thudding in my chest. The video didn't show anything else, just the street, quiet and empty. I felt like I should close the laptop, but I couldn't move. I just kept watching, waiting for something to happen. The seconds ticked by, and then, just as the video was about to end, I saw it. Movement. Someone walked into the frame, barely visible in the low light. At first I thought it was just some random person, maybe a jogger or someone walking their dog. But then the figure stopped, right in front of my house. They stood there facing the camera, staring straight ahead. I couldn't make out their face. It was hidden by shadows, but they were standing too still, too deliberately. I froze. Was this someone playing a prank? Maybe a neighbor messing with me? Then, as if on cue, the figure turned slowly, almost mechanically, and started walking up my driveway. The screen went black. My heart felt like it was going to pound out of my chest. I slammed the laptop shut and jumped up from the chair, stumbling back a few steps as if the thing had burned me. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My house, my street, and something, walking up to my door. I glanced toward the front of my house, half expecting to see a silhouette standing in the window, but everything looked normal. Dark, quiet, just like it always was this late at night. I listened carefully, straining to hear any sound. Footsteps, a knock on the door, anything, but there was only silence. I told myself it had to be a joke. That's all it was, right? Someone messing with me, using some kind of pre-recorded video. Maybe the footage wasn't even live. That had to be it. I mean, why else would someone go through all this trouble? But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I tried to shake off the feeling creeping up my spine, but it wouldn't go away. The instructions had said not to leave the house, and now I understood why. The moment I stepped outside, there was a chance that figure, the one I had just seen, would be waiting for me. I decided to double-check the locks, pacing around the house, trying to calm myself down. Everything was locked up tight, just like it had been. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me right there, from the shadows just beyond the windows. I went back to the laptop, debating whether or not to open it again. Part of me wanted to throw it out the window, but the other part, the part that had signed up for this in the first place, wanted to see what happened next. Maybe if I finished the tasks, I could get some closure. Maybe this would all make sense by the end. With shaky hands, I opened the laptop again. The screen flickered to life, and a new message popped up. Task 2. Turn off all the lights. Do not look outside. My stomach twisted. This was getting worse, but I felt trapped. Every instinct told me to stop, to shut down the laptop and forget I'd ever heard of this job. But I couldn't. It was like I had stepped into some twisted game, and the only way out was to keep playing. I took a deep breath and started turning off the lights, one by one. The house fell into complete darkness. I couldn't see anything except for the faint glow of the laptop screen. The silence grew heavier, like the walls were closing in around me. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, my back pressed against the wall, trying to follow the instructions. Do not look outside. The temptation was almost unbearable. Every fiber of my being wanted to glance toward the window, just to check, just to make sure no one was standing there. But I resisted. The laptop buzzed, and another message appeared. You're doing well. Task 3. Wait. Wait? That was it? What was I waiting for? I stared at the screen, the tension rising inside me. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my ears ringing with the suffocating silence of my darkened house. I didn't know how long I was supposed to wait, and with each passing minute, the pressure built. I wasn't even sure what I was waiting for. A sound? Another task? Someone to knock on the door? Then, without warning, my phone buzzed on the table next to me. It was so sudden, so loud in the darkness, that I jumped, knocking over the chair behind me. I scrambled to pick up my phone, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. There was a text message, but not from any number I recognized. Don't open the door. I stared at the words, my heart hammering in my chest. Don't open the door. What door? I hadn't even heard anyone knock, but the moment I read that message, there it was. Tap, tap, tap. A soft knock coming from the front door. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, my phone clutched in my hand, my eyes locked on the front door across the room. Another knock, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wanted me to know they were there. My breath caught in my throat as I took a shaky step backward, my mind racing. The video, the figure walking up to my door, the warning. Then the knocking stopped, replaced by something worse. From the other side of the door, I heard a slow, deliberate whisper, barely audible through the wood. I know you're in there. My blood went cold. That voice. It was too soft, too calm. The kind of calm that lets you know the person, or thing, on the other side has all the time in the world. I stood there frozen, staring at the front door, my pulse hammering in my ears. My hand tightened around my phone, the message still glowing on the screen. Don't open the door. The whisper came again, just as soft, just as deliberate. I know you're in there, you can't hide. I backed away from the door, inching toward the laptop. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, but there was nothing. The lights were off, the house was pitch black, and something, or someone, was standing just beyond the door, waiting for me to make a mistake. I glanced at the laptop, hoping for more instructions, but the screen remained blank, the previous message taunting me with its simplicity. Wait. Wait for what? The knocks had stopped, but I could still hear movement outside, shuffling footsteps, the faint sound of breathing. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. They were taking their time, savoring every second of my fear. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. Then, slowly, almost too slowly to be real, the doorknob started to turn. It didn't rattle or jiggle like in horror movies. No, it turned smoothly, quietly, like whoever was out there had done this 1,000 times before. I could see the knob twisting in the dim light from the street lamp outside, inching closer to unlocking the door. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't cooperate. It was like I was stuck in a nightmare, one where you try to scream, but no sound comes out. The knob clicked softly, and the door creaked open just a fraction, just enough for a sliver of air to creep into the house. "I'm coming in!" the voice whispered again, closer now, like it was right on the other side of the crack in the door. I don't know what came over me, but something snapped inside. I lunged toward the door, slamming it shut with both hands, twisting the lock as hard as I could. The sound echoed through the house, but I didn't care. I just stood there, pressing my back against the door, my breathing ragged, heart racing out of control. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The shuffling outside stopped. The air was thick with tension, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. Then, without warning, there was a loud bang against the door, like someone, or something, had thrown their entire weight against it. The door shook, the frame groaning under the pressure. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the coffee table as another bang rattled the door. The voice was gone now, replaced by this low, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Whatever was outside wasn't trying to whisper anymore. It was trying to break in. The door shook again, harder this time, and I backed away, searching for anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on the laptop, still sitting on the table, the screen flickering with a new message. Task 4, hide. My heart skipped a beat. Hide? Where? This was my house. I knew every corner, every hiding spot. But I had the feeling that wherever I hid, this thing would find me. Still, I didn't have a choice. The banging at the door was getting louder, more violent, and I knew it wouldn't hold for much longer. I grabbed the laptop and rushed into the bedroom, shutting the door behind me as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the laptop as I slid under the bed. It was cramped, the space barely wide enough for me to squeeze into, but I didn't care. I had to hide. I had to follow the instructions. The house was silent again, except for the pounding of my heart in my ears. I stared at the door, waiting, listening for any sign of movement. Then I heard it, the sound of the front door creaking open. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever had been trying to get in was now taking their time, savoring every step. Footsteps echoed through the house, heavy and slow, moving through the living room. They paused for a moment, then continued, each step louder than the last. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps were getting closer, moving down the hallway straight toward my bedroom. The door creaked open, and I could see the faint outline of feet moving just beyond the bed, stopping right in front of me. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood, trying to stay as still as possible. The feet shifted, and the floor creaked under the weight. Whoever or whatever it was, they knew I was in here. I waited, terrified, as the feet moved closer to the bed, pausing right at the edge. There was a long, agonizing silence before the whisper came again, so close I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I know you're here. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to disappear, to vanish into the darkness under the bed. But the footsteps moved away, slowly retreating, out of the bedroom and back down the hallway. The front door creaked open, and then silence. I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. The house was still. No footsteps, no whispers, no banging, just silence. I crawled out from under the bed, my body shaking. I didn't know if it was gone or if it was waiting for me outside, but I couldn't stay in this house anymore. I had to get out. I grabbed my phone, my laptop, and rushed to the front door, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I opened the door, my blood ran cold. There was nothing outside, no sign of anyone or anything. The street was empty, just like in the video. But on my front step, neatly placed where I couldn't miss it, was a single envelope. I picked it up with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a piece of paper with a single sentence, written in that same sharp, uneven handwriting I had seen on the package. You completed the tasks. The real work begins now. I stood there, staring at the note in my trembling hands. The words seemed to crawl off the page, winding their way into my mind like a poison. The real work begins now. What did that mean? Hadn't I done enough? The laptop tasks, the whispers at the door, the things stalking through my house in the middle of the night. What more could there be? But something about the phrasing, the real work, it chilled me to the bone. I looked around, the street eerily quiet. No one was out, no cars passing by. Just that oppressive, unnatural stillness that made it feel like I was the only one left in the world. I quickly closed the door and locked it, as if that would somehow keep whatever this was at bay. My heart was racing, and I felt trapped. Trapped in my own house, the one place that was supposed to feel safe. I dropped the note on the table, trying to gather my thoughts. I needed answers. I grabbed the laptop again, hoping something new would be there. Some explanation, some way to make sense of all this. As soon as I opened it, a message appeared. Good job. Now for your final task. Final task? I wanted to scream. This had to end. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. But the message continued. Task 5. Stay inside. Do not open the door under any circumstances. Await further instructions. Stay inside? That sounded simple enough, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I trusted it. The last time they told me not to open the door, something had tried to break in. Now they wanted me to sit here, waiting. Waiting for what? I tried to calm my breathing, tried to focus. There had to be a way out of this. Maybe if I completed this last task, whatever this was, it would end. I could move on, forget this nightmare ever happened. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Hours passed. I sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the dull glow of the laptop screen. I didn't dare turn the lights back on, didn't dare do anything that might make me a target. Outside, the street remained eerily silent. No cars, no people, nothing. And then, just as the tension was starting to settle, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. That same soft knock. This time it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the back, right at the door that led to the small yard outside. My blood ran cold. I wasn't going to open it. I'd learned that lesson, but I wasn't going to ignore it either. The knocks came again, a little louder now, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I stared at the laptop, hoping for some new message, some guidance on what to do, but the screen remained blank. No more instructions. Just that last command. Stay inside. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, like whoever was on the other side knew I was inside, knew I was sitting there, helpless and afraid. My hands were shaking as I tried to think. If I stayed here, would they break in again? Could I survive another night like the last one? Then, in the middle of the chaos, the knocking stopped. Silence. I froze, listening. I didn't dare breathe, didn't dare make a sound. Knock. Knock. This time it wasn't at the back door, it was at the window. My head whipped toward the sound, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. A shadow. A shape moving just outside, too quick to focus on. I scrambled back from the window, heart racing. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, cornered. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't going to give up. The silence returned, hanging heavy in the air, and for a moment, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they were gone. But then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't want to look. But something compelled me to pick it up. A new text message. No number, no name, just a single line of text. You're running out of time. My heart sank. Time for what? I felt the panic rising in my chest. This wasn't just some twisted prank anymore. This was something else, something darker, more dangerous. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. The laptop buzzed, and a new message popped up. The choice is yours. Open the door, or leave through the window. Either way, we'll be waiting. I stared at the screen, horrified. I hadn't signed up for this. This wasn't part of the deal. They had given me an impossible choice. Leave and face whatever was waiting outside, or stay trapped in this house, with whatever had been knocking now closing in. I heard movement from the back door again, the knob rattling slightly, followed by a soft scraping sound along the outside wall. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. It didn't move like a person, didn't sound like anything I could explain, but it was coming for me. That much was clear. My mind raced. There had to be a way out. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't face them. I grabbed my phone, frantically searching for a signal, for anyone I could call, but there was nothing. No bars, no contacts. My phone was as useless as the laptop now. And then I heard it. A voice, faint, coming from outside the window again. "We see you." It wasn't just one voice. It was many. A chorus of whispers, overlapping, murmuring, echoing around me like they were in every corner of the house. I backed up, my breathing shallow, my body shaking. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, as if they were closing in, as if they could see me, hear every breath I took. I was running out of time. My mind was screaming at me to move, to do something, anything. But I felt paralyzed by the weight of it all. The whispers grew louder, pressing in on me, filling every inch of the room. I had to make a choice. The whispers surrounded me, crawling into my mind, filling the space with their maddening, overlapping voices. I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. The front door, the back door, the window, it didn't matter. They were everywhere, and I was trapped. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might give out. The laptop buzzed again. Another message appeared, cold and final. "Choose now." I glanced toward the window, my stomach twisting. There was no way I was going out there. I could still hear the scraping sound from before, like something sharp was being dragged across the wall, waiting for me to make a mistake. My breath hitched as a shadow moved past the window again, this time slower, deliberate, like it knew I was watching. I looked toward the front door, my mind reeling. The thing that had knocked earlier, the whisperer, was still out there. It could have broken in at any time, but it didn't. It was waiting, just like everything else. The air around me felt suffocating, thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The whispers grew louder, filling the space around me with their suffocating presence. "We see you." "You can't hide." "Choose." I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to focus, trying to think through the panic. I couldn't stay here, not anymore. Every second felt like the walls were pressing in on me, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. But which way? Front door or window? I made a snap decision. The window. At least if I went through the window, I had a chance to see what was out there, to gauge the danger. The front door? There was no telling what waited on the other side. And if I was going to die, I wanted to see it coming. I moved fast, scrambling to the window and pulling it open. The cool night air rushed in, chilling my skin. For a moment I hesitated, feeling the weight of whatever was waiting for me just beyond the darkness. But the whispers were right behind me now, and I could feel something closing in, something that wasn't just noise. It was real. With a burst of adrenaline, I swung my leg over the windowsill and dropped down into the yard, landing hard on the ground. The grass felt cold and damp beneath me, and I crouched there for a second, my heart thudding so loud I was sure they could hear it. The moment my feet hit the ground, everything went still. No more whispers, no more movement, just the eerie silence of the night. I waited, expecting something to lunge out from the shadows, expecting to feel cold hands grab me from behind. But nothing happened. I slowly rose to my feet, my eyes scanning the yard, the street, everything around me. That's when I saw them. Across the yard, barely visible in the faint light from the street lamp, stood a figure. No, not just one figure. 3. They stood perfectly still, watching me. Their faces were shadowed, their bodies unnaturally still. It was like they were waiting for me to come to them. I took a step back, my stomach dropping. There was no way out. I glanced toward the back gate, but it was too far, and I could feel their eyes on me, tracking every movement. The laptop buzzed in my arms, and against my better judgment, I glanced down at the screen. Run. The command was clear, and my body reacted before my brain could. I turned on my heel and sprinted across the yard toward the gate, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures didn't move, but I knew they were watching, waiting for me to slip up. I reached the gate, my fingers fumbling with the latch, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it, but finally the latch clicked, and I shoved the gate open. I burst through it, stumbling into the alley behind my house. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting away, putting as much distance as I could between me and that house. Those figures, those whispers. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were on fire. But I didn't stop. I kept running, through the alley, past houses that blurred into shadows, until I reached the main road. I doubled over, gasping for air, my vision swimming. When I finally looked up, the world was still. Silent. Empty. There was no one around. No figures. No whispers. I stood there, trembling, trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly dropped it when I pulled it out. A new message. No number, just the same anonymous text. You've completed the task. Congratulations. I stared at the message, my blood running cold. That was it. The real work was over. I couldn't process it. The terror, the whispers, the figures, what had it all been for? But the phone buzzed again. Another message. This is only the beginning. I looked back toward my house, the one I had just fled from. The windows were dark, the yard still. But I knew, deep down, that something had changed. The house wasn't mine anymore. It had never been mine, not since the moment I signed up. I should have known better. Easy money? There's no such thing. And now, no matter how far I run, I know they'll be watching. Always. I ordered a custom mystery box from the dark web. Inside were objects from my childhood. All right, let me start by saying I'm not one of those people who spends their free time on the dark web. I'm not a hacker. I'm not some thrill seeker looking to buy illegal stuff. And I'm definitely not some conspiracy theorist trying to find classified government secrets. But last month I did something stupid. I ordered a mystery box from the dark web. I'm a sucker for those unboxing videos. You know the ones. People buying random stuff online, opening the boxes on camera, and getting freaked out when they find something creepy. I'd been watching a lot of them, maybe too many, to the point where I got curious. Everyone always talks about the dark web as this terrifying place where you can find anything if you look hard enough. I didn't believe half of it, but my curiosity got the better of me. One night I found myself on some sketchy forum, reading about custom mystery boxes. This wasn't the usual junk you see on eBay. These were personalized. Supposedly, the person creating the box would somehow know things about you. Details no one else should. At first, I thought it was just BS, a gimmick to get people to fork over more money for a spooky thrill. But the idea stuck with me. Could they really find personal stuff? I didn't know how, but I was weirdly intrigued. And yeah, maybe I was a little bored with life at the time, so it felt like a harmless way to mix things up. I clicked on one of the links that supposedly led to a vendor who specialized in these personalized mystery boxes. The page was basic, no flashy graphics, no long descriptions, just a brief message. Tell us what haunts you, and we will deliver. Below that was a form where I had to input basic information, name, address, the usual. But then there was this weird section at the bottom that asked, what do you fear? What do you want to find? I sat there for a minute, staring at that question. What do I fear? I mean, who really knows the answer to that? So I typed something dumb. Surprise me. That's all I wrote. Looking back, I wish I'd thought twice before sending that. The price was steep. $500. Way more than I'd usually spend on something like this. But I convinced myself it'd be a one-time thing. Something to laugh about later with my friends. Maybe even post online if the unboxing was worth it. I hit send, and closed my laptop, telling myself it was probably just a scam. I figured the worst that could happen was that I'd get some random junk in the mail. I couldn't have been more wrong. About 2 weeks later, a package showed up at my door. Plain brown cardboard box, no return address, no markings at all. It was bigger than I expected, maybe about the size of a large shoebox, and heavier than I thought it would be. My stomach flipped when I saw it, a mix of excitement and that gnawing sense that I was about to get way more than I bargained for. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and sat down at my kitchen table with the box in front of me. I'd seen enough of these videos to know how this goes. Slow unboxing, plenty of commentary, and maybe a few fake reactions to keep things fun. But as soon as I cut through the tape and opened the flaps, I knew this wasn't going to be fun. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't rotting or anything like that, but there was this weird old scent, like dust and something faintly metallic. I pulled out the first item. It was a cassette tape, a freaking cassette tape, like from the 90s, the kind you'd use in a Walkman. Except this one was different. The label was torn and worn out, but I could still make out the words written on it in faded blue ink. Summer 1997. I froze. That was my handwriting. I dropped the tape like it had burned me, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't some random cassette. I knew exactly what it was. Back in the summer of 1997, I made a mixtape with my favorite songs. I'd recorded it straight from the radio, but that tape was long gone. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. How could this be here, in this box, with my handwriting on it? My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe someone had found the tape at a thrift store or something. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I tried to calm myself down, but deep down, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. I pulled out the next item, a small plastic toy, a red race car, scuffed and worn. I stared at it, my hands trembling. This was the same toy I used to carry around when I was a kid. I remembered it so vividly because I lost it during a family trip to the beach when I was 8. My parents had looked for it everywhere, but it was just gone. So how the hell was it sitting in this box in front of me? At this point, I was freaking out. I didn't want to keep going, but some part of me had to know what else was in there. I reached in again, this time pulling out a photograph. It was old and slightly crumpled, but I recognized it instantly. It was a picture of me and my brother, sitting on the front porch of our childhood home. I must have been 6 or 7 in the photo. My brother was younger, maybe 4, grinning up at me like I was the coolest person in the world. But here's the thing. I didn't remember this picture. I remember the house, the porch, the summer days we spent playing outside. But this exact photo, I'd never seen it before. And yet, there it was, clear as day, like someone had plucked it straight from a memory I didn't even know I had. That's when the panic really set in. This wasn't just random stuff. These were personal things, things I hadn't seen in years, things that were lost. But how? How could someone find these? How could they know? My phone was still recording, but I didn't care about the video anymore. I shoved the box away, heart racing, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. This wasn't a prank. It couldn't be. But if it wasn't a prank, then what was it? And more importantly, who sent it? I glanced at the box again, feeling my stomach churn. There was something else in there, something I hadn't noticed before. A small envelope, tucked in the corner, with my name scrawled on the front, in the same faded ink that had been on the cassette tape. With shaking hands, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. One sentence. That's all it said. You've forgotten more than you think. My blood ran cold, and for the first time since I'd opened that box, I realized something terrifying. There were things in my past, things I couldn't remember, and someone out there knew exactly what they were. After reading that note, I dropped it on the table like it was poisonous. My whole body felt numb, and my mind was racing in every direction, trying to find any rational explanation. But nothing made sense. The words on the paper, "You've forgotten more than you think," sent a cold chill down my spine that wouldn't go away. I tried to collect myself. I paced around my apartment, running my hands through my hair. But all I could think about were the things I'd pulled from that box. The cassette tape, the toy car, the photo. These weren't just random objects. They were pieces of my life. Things I hadn't seen in years, things that had been lost to time. But someone had them, and somehow, they'd ended up in my hands. I sat down at the table again, staring at the box like it might spring to life and grab me. Part of me wanted to throw the whole thing in the trash, burn it, pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. There were too many unanswered questions. I needed to know how these things got here, why they got here. I grabbed the cassette tape again, turning it over in my hands. The faded ink, the scribbled, "Summer 1997." It all looked exactly like the tape I'd made as a kid. The label was peeling at the edges, just like I remembered. But that tape was gone. I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager, when my family moved, and we lost half our stuff in the shuffle. I couldn't just leave it as some creepy coincidence. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old cassette player. Yeah, I still had one stuffed away in a box somewhere, dusty and forgotten like a relic of the past. I hooked it up and slid the tape inside, my heart pounding in my chest as I hit play. At first, nothing happened, just static, the soft hiss of a blank tape. But then, after a few seconds, the sound of a song crackled through the speakers. It was "The Sign" by Ace of Base, one of my favorite tracks back in the day. I hadn't heard that song in years, but as soon as it started playing, I was flooded with memories of long car rides with my parents, the windows down, singing along to the radio. But that wave of nostalgia didn't last long. About halfway through the song, the audio cut out. The tape hissed for a few seconds, and then something else started playing. A voice. But it wasn't mine. It was distorted, like it had been recorded over the music, but too faint to make out clearly. My skin prickled, and I leaned in closer, turning the volume up. I could barely make out the words, but the voice kept repeating the same thing, over and over again. "You shouldn't have forgotten." My stomach twisted into knots. The voice was faint, almost like it was whispering from the background of the recording. There was a coldness to it, like someone was speaking directly to me through time, through the static of that old tape, reaching into my head. I yanked the cassette out of the player and stared at it in disbelief. It didn't make any sense. I hadn't recorded anything like that. I mean, how could I have? I was a kid. There was no way I could have recorded that voice without remembering it. And even if I had, who was speaking? I was shaken, but I wasn't done. There was more in that box, and no matter how terrified I was, I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. I reached for the toy car next. It felt strange in my hand, smaller than I remembered. My red race car, the one I used to carry with me everywhere, until I lost it. But when I turned it over, I noticed something odd. Scratched into the underside, in tiny, jagged letters, were 3 words: "Come find me." I dropped it on the table like it had shocked me. How did that get there? I didn't remember ever carving anything into that toy, especially something as creepy as "Come find me." But there it was, clear as day, scratched into the plastic like a message meant for me. My hands were trembling at this point. This wasn't just some random object anymore. This was a puzzle. Something, or someone, was trying to tell me something. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that this box wasn't just a creepy mystery for fun. It felt personal, like someone knew me better than I knew myself. That's when I remembered the photograph. I picked it up again, studying the image. Me and my brother, sitting on that porch, smiling like nothing in the world could touch us. The sun was setting behind us, casting long shadows on the grass. But as I looked closer, my breath caught in my throat. In the background of the photo, barely visible behind the tree line, was a figure. It wasn't clear, just a blurry, dark shape standing among the trees. I hadn't noticed it before, but now that I was looking for it, it was impossible to miss. My heart raced as I tried to remember the day that photo was taken, but the memory was hazy, like it had been plucked from my mind and altered somehow. I flipped the photo over, hoping for some clue, some explanation, and there it was. Written in the same faded ink that had been on the tape, on the toy car, was another message. I've been waiting. I dropped the photo and backed away from the table, my pulse hammering in my ears. None of this made sense. This wasn't just some random box filled with junk. It was a message, something deliberate and calculated. But why? Why me? I glanced around my apartment, suddenly feeling exposed, like someone was watching me. Every creak of the building, every distant sound from the street below sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe I should call someone, tell them what was happening. But who would believe me? I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over my brother's name. I hadn't talked to him in a while. We'd drifted apart over the years. But maybe he remembered something about that photo, about that day. Maybe he'd know what the hell was going on. Before I could hit call, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email. No subject line, no sender. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The last thing is coming tomorrow. Be ready. The last thing? What did that mean? What else could possibly be coming? I had no idea what was happening. But one thing was clear. I was in way deeper than I'd ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The email played over and over in my head. The last thing is coming tomorrow. Be ready. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every little sound in my apartment making my heart jump. I kept glancing at the box on the table, afraid it might move or reveal something else in the dead of night. But nothing happened. Just an eerie, suffocating silence. When the sun finally came up, I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or more terrified. Today was the day. Whatever the last thing was, it was coming. And I didn't feel ready for anything. I tried to go about my day like normal, though my mind was on high alert. Everything felt wrong, like the world was slightly off balance. Even the light coming through the windows seemed colder, dimmer. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another email, another sign, but nothing came. By noon, I was a ball of nerves, pacing around my apartment, feeling like something terrible was about to happen. Then, at 2:37 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. I froze. No one knocks on my door. My building has a security system, and all deliveries get dropped at the front desk. For a split second, I thought about ignoring it, pretending I wasn't home. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid this. Whatever was coming, it was here now. With shaky hands, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. My heart pounded in my chest as I unlocked the door and slowly opened it. There, sitting on my doormat, was a small, unmarked package. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with twine, just like something out of an old-timey movie. I stared at it for a moment, every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone, to shut the door and walk away. But of course I didn't. I reached down and picked it up, noticing immediately how light it was. Whatever was inside couldn't have weighed more than a few ounces. I brought it inside, placed it on the table next to the other box, and stared at it for a good 5 minutes before I worked up the courage to open it. I untied the twine, peeled back the paper, and found an old VHS tape. A wave of confusion hit me. I didn't even own a VHS player anymore. And even if I did, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was on this tape. But, like before, curiosity overpowered my fear. I grabbed my phone and texted my brother, asking if he still had the old VHS player we used as kids. He didn't ask any questions, just said I could come over and use it. I wasn't sure if I should involve him in this, but at this point, I needed answers. I headed over to his place, VHS tape in hand, my nerves on edge the entire drive. When I got there, he seemed a little concerned. I must have looked like a wreck, sleepless, jumpy, constantly glancing over my shoulder. "What's up with you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as I handed him the tape. I need to see what's on this," I mumbled, trying to play it off like it was no big deal. He gave me a weird look, but didn't push it, plugging the old player into his TV. The tape went in with a clunk, and for a second, the screen stayed black. Then static. The sound of the tape hissed through the speakers, and slowly, an image began to form. At first, it was just a shaky, handheld shot of a backyard. A familiar backyard. It was our childhood home. The camera panned over the lawn, the swing set, the old treehouse we used to play in. But something was off. The colors were muted, almost washed out, like it was an old home video that had deteriorated over time. But the house looked exactly as I remembered it. Then the camera focused on something that made my blood run cold. It was me. I was sitting on the porch, just like in the photo from the mystery box, wearing the same clothes, same smile. But this wasn't the same moment as the picture. This was different. I was talking to someone. The camera zoomed in, and there, standing just outside the frame, was a figure. Tall, shadowy, with no clear face. Just a blur where their features should have been. The younger me didn't seem scared. I was smiling, laughing even, like I was talking to an old friend. "Do you remember this?" my brother asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't respond. I didn't remember this at all. The video cut abruptly to static again, and then a new scene played. It was nighttime now. The camera was in the same backyard, but the tone had completely shifted. The swing set creaked in the wind, and the treehouse loomed in the background. The camera moved shakily, like whoever was holding it was in a hurry, maybe even scared. And then, there it was. The figure. Standing in the middle of the yard, barely visible in the dim light. Except this time it was different. It wasn't just standing there, it was walking toward the camera, slowly, deliberately. I felt my brother tense up beside me. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, but I couldn't answer. I was glued to the screen, heart pounding, every instinct telling me to look away. The camera trembled as the figure got closer, but just before it reached the lens, the video cut to black. For a few seconds there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Then a voice, distorted, just like on the cassette tape. It said one word. "Remember." The tape ended with a sharp click, the screen going dark. My brother stared at the blank screen, his face pale. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I was feeling deep in my gut. "I don't remember any of this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But even as I said it, flashes of memories began flooding back, fragments, broken pieces of something I had long buried. The backyard, the swing set, the treehouse, the figure. I had seen it before. I knew it, and I had forgotten it. Without another word, I grabbed the VHS tape, my mind spinning. My brother asked if I was okay, but I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to process what I had just seen. As I drove home, the memories became clearer. Bits and pieces of that summer, of strange moments I had brushed off as childhood imagination. But they weren't just dreams. They were real. And someone, or something, had been watching me then, just like they were watching me now. When I got home, I found another email waiting for me. "It's time to remember what you've hidden. Check the treehouse." I froze. My childhood home had been sold years ago. The treehouse. I hadn't thought about it in forever. But somehow, I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow I would drive back to that house, to the treehouse, because whatever I had forgotten, whatever I had buried, was waiting for me there. The next morning, I woke up with that sick, sinking feeling in my gut, the kind you get when you know you're about to do something you'll regret. But I couldn't ignore the email. The words, "Check the treehouse," played over and over in my head. I knew I had to go back, even though everything inside me screamed to leave it alone. My childhood home was only about an hour's drive away, but it felt like a lifetime since I'd last seen it. The whole ride there, I kept thinking about that VHS tape, about the figure in the video, and the way it seemed so familiar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking straight into something dark, something that had been waiting for me. When I pulled up to the old house, my heart skipped a beat. It looked almost exactly the same. The paint was peeling a bit, and the lawn wasn't as neatly kept as I remembered, but the structure itself hadn't changed. The new owners had left the treehouse standing, which was a surprise. That thing had to be over 20 years old by now, and yet, there it was, looming in the backyard like a shadow from my past. I got out of the car and stood at the edge of the yard, staring at the treehouse. Memories flooded back. Me and my brother climbing up the rickety wooden ladder, pretending it was a pirate ship or a secret hideout. But now, the treehouse felt different, sinister, like it had been waiting for me all this time. The air felt heavy, and as I walked closer, I noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, just an eerie stillness that wrapped around the place like a suffocating blanket. The old wooden ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed up, each step making me more uneasy. The closer I got to the top, the more I felt like something was watching me. When I finally hoisted myself into the treehouse, the smell of old wood and dust hit me, and I felt a wave of nostalgia, mixed with a deep sense of dread. The inside looked exactly how we had left it. Crude drawings my brother and I had scratched into the walls with rocks, a couple of forgotten toys, and a small pile of leaves that had blown in through a crack in the roof. But as I scanned the room, my eyes landed on something I hadn't expected to see. There, sitting in the middle of the floor, was an old, weathered box. I recognized it immediately. It was the same box I'd found in the mystery package, the one with my childhood belongings. Except now, it was here, in the treehouse, as if it had been waiting for me all along. My hands trembled as I approached it, a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. How the hell had this box gotten here? I had left it in my apartment. There was no way someone had brought it here before me. I crouched down, hesitating for a moment before slowly lifting the lid. Inside was a single item, an old journal, its pages yellowed and worn, the cover cracked from age. I didn't recognize it at first, but as soon as I touched it, a sharp pain shot through my head, and suddenly, memories I had long buried came rushing back. The journal was mine. I'd kept it the summer I was 9 years old, but I hadn't thought about it in years. I couldn't even remember where it had gone. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, each entry like a long-forgotten snapshot of my childhood. It was all there, my thoughts, my daydreams, the games my brother and I played. But as I reached the middle of the journal, the tone changed. The entries became darker, stranger. I wrote about someone, or something, visiting us in the treehouse. I called it the Watcher. At first, it sounded like an imaginary friend, something a bored kid would come up with to pass the time. But the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just a game. One entry stood out. The Watcher came again last night. He stood at the edge of the yard, just watching us. I asked him why he never comes closer, and he said, "You're not ready yet." But I don't think I want him to come any closer. I told my brother, but he doesn't believe me. He never sees the Watcher. I felt my pulse quicken, the blood rushing to my ears. The memories were coming back now, fragments of things I hadn't thought about in years. I remembered sitting in the treehouse late at night, staring out into the dark, seeing that figure, the Watcher, standing just beyond the trees, always watching, always waiting. I turned the page, my heart pounding. The next entry was written in shaky, uneven handwriting. The watcher said he's getting closer. He told me to remember the things I've forgotten. He told me it's almost time. I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling. My head was spinning. This wasn't just some childhood nightmare. The things in the box, the figure in the video, the emails, it was all connected. And somehow I had forgotten it. That's when I heard the creaking. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as the creaking grew louder. It was coming from below. Someone, or something, was climbing the ladder. Slowly, I turned toward the window of the treehouse, the one that overlooked the yard. My breath caught in my throat. Standing at the base of the tree, half hidden in the shadows, was the figure. Tall, unmoving, with that same blurry face from the VHS tape. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, staring up at me. But this time I could feel it. The watcher wasn't going to stay at the edge of the yard anymore. He was coming closer. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, the walls of the treehouse suddenly feeling too small, too confining. I could hear the ladder creak again. Closer now, like the weight of something was pulling it down. My mind raced. I needed to get out of here, but there was nowhere to go. And then, the voice. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was louder, clearer, echoing inside my head. You've forgotten too much. It's time to remember. My vision blurred, and I stumbled backward, knocking over the box as I fell. The journal slid across the floor, pages flipping wildly. My head throbbed, a sharp pain splitting through my skull as more memories flooded back. Flashes of nights spent in the treehouse, of whispers in the dark, of something always watching me, waiting for me. I scrambled toward the window, desperate to escape, but the moment I reached the edge, everything went still. The ladder stopped creaking, the voice faded, and when I looked down at the yard, the figure was gone. But I knew, deep in my bones, that the watcher hadn't left. He was inside now, and he was waiting for me to remember. I stayed crouched in the corner of the treehouse for what felt like hours, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the creaking had stopped. The voice had gone silent. And the watcher, he wasn't in the yard anymore. But I could still feel him. He was close. So close, in fact, it felt like he was standing right behind me, watching my every move, waiting for me to do something. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see him. It was like he existed just outside my line of sight, lurking in the corners of my vision, but never fully appearing. My head was still throbbing from the flood of memories, pieces of my past that had been hidden from me, locked away somewhere deep in my mind. The journal lay open on the floor, pages fluttering in the wind, and as I glanced at it, I knew there was one more thing I had to do. One more piece of the puzzle I needed to face. I had to remember. I reached for the journal, flipping through the pages with shaky hands until I reached the last entry. The handwriting was erratic, like it had been scribbled in a rush, the ink smudged from what looked like tears. The watcher told me I had to forget. He said it was the only way to stay safe. But I can't. I won't. He's coming for me tonight, and I'm scared. I told my brother, but he still doesn't believe me. No one does. They think it's just my imagination, but it's not. I know it's real, and I know he won't stop until I remember what I did. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the page, my mind reeling. What had I done? What had I forgotten that was so important? Suddenly it all clicked into place. That summer I had buried deep in my mind. Something had happened. Something I hadn't wanted to face. I had been obsessed with the watcher, convinced he was coming for me, convinced he was real. But no one believed me. My parents thought it was just a phase. My brother brushed it off as some weird childhood fantasy. But I knew. Even then, I knew. One night, after weeks of seeing the Watcher at the edge of the yard, I decided to confront him. I hadn't told anyone, not even my brother. I'd waited until everyone was asleep, then crept out to the treehouse, a flashlight clutched in my trembling hand. The Watcher had been waiting for me. I remembered standing there, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of his presence just beyond the tree line. I remembered whispering, "What do you want?" My voice had been so small, so fragile. He hadn't answered me with words. Instead, he had stepped forward, closer than ever before, and I had run. I'd bolted back into the house, heart pounding in my chest, too terrified to look back. But when I got inside, I had realized something awful. My brother. He had been following me, curious about what I was doing. He had seen me run, and he had gone into the yard, alone. The memory crashed into me like a wave, cold and unforgiving. I had left him there. I had left him out in the yard with the Watcher, and my brother had never come back. The days that followed were a blur of police searches, questions, and endless nights of tears. They never found him. He had just disappeared, vanished without a trace, and no one ever connected it to the Watcher. No one, except me. That was when the Watcher had spoken to me for the first time. He had told me that if I wanted to survive, if I wanted to forget the guilt, I had to lock the memory away. I had to forget. And I had listened. I had let the Watcher bury the memory so deep inside me that it had become lost, just like my brother. But now I remembered. The weight of the truth hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. My brother was gone because of me. Because I had run. Because I had been too scared to save him. I had buried the memory, but it had been waiting, festering all these years. That's what the Watcher wanted. He had been waiting for me to remember, to finally face what I had done. I stood up slowly, my legs weak, my heart heavy with the truth. The Watcher wasn't a ghost or a demon. He was something far worse. He was the embodiment of my guilt, my fear, the part of me that had let my brother down. And now that I had remembered, I knew what I had to do. I walked to the edge of the treehouse, the journal clutched tightly in my hands, and looked out into the yard. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground. I could feel the Watcher lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the distance, watching me. But this time I didn't run. I didn't hide. I stood there, facing the truth, facing my fear. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Watcher faded into the dark, leaving me alone with the weight of what I had done. I don't know if I'll ever be free of him. I don't know if I'll ever stop seeing him in the shadows, waiting, watching. But now, at least, I know why he's there. He's not just watching me. He's making sure I never forget again.